อืมช่วงโควิดนะคะน่าเบื่อมากไม่ได้ไปมหาลัยไม่ได้เจอเพื่อนไม่ได้เจออาจารย์นะคะแถมงานเยอะมากด้วยอืมอ้าวพี่แพนสวัสดีค่ะโอ้กำลังคิดถึงพี่แพนอยู่พอดีเลยนะคะเนี่ยไม่เจอพี่แพนตั้งนานพี่แพนสวยเหมือนเดิมเลยค่ะอ๋อใช่สิแป้งลืมไปวันนี้แป้งมาพรีเซนต์งานนี่งั้นขอพูดเป็นภาษาอังกฤษนะคะ Hi, my name is Vanarin Virasan and my student ID is 6129025 and I am going to be presenting about the brain structure. Okay, so for this picture, we can see the lateral view boundaries. In the lateral view, we can see the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and temporal lobe. And this red line is called the imaginary line, and it connects between the parietal occipital sulcus to the preoccipital notch, and it separates the occipital lobe to the parietal lobe. This is the second imaginary line, and it is the backward continuation of the posterior ramus of the lateral sulcus to meet the first line. This blue line is called the central sulcus, and it divides the parietal lobe to the frontal lobe. And this line right here is called the lateral fissure, and it divides the temporal lobe to the frontal lobe and parietal lobe. And for the temporal lobe, the second imaginary line is also considered to be the like one of the borders. Okay, so for the next picture, we can see the insula, in which it is considered to be the fifth lobe, and it is buried in the depth of the stem and posterior ramus of the lateral sulcus, and it is also surrounded by the circular sulcus. Okay, so in this picture, so each half of the cerebrum contains gray matter in the outermost layer called cerebral cortex and have fissure, sulcus, and gyrus. And for the cerebral hemisphere, it has three poles in which you can see the frontal pole, temporal pole, and occipital pole respectively from the left. And the major sulcus on the superolateral surface includes this one. It's called the central sulcus of Rolando, and this line. This is called the lateral sulcus, and it has three rami, which is the anterior horizontal, anterior ascending, and the posterior rami. Okay, so in this picture, I'm going to talk about the frontal lobe first, so it's in pink. And this one, so the precentral gyrus is separated by the precentral sulcus, and this one is called the superior and inferior frontal sulcus, which divides the superior, middle, and frontal gyri. And also the anterior and ascending rami of the anterior sulcus extends into the inferior frontal gyrus, and you can see it divides into three parts, A, B, C, which is called pars orbitalis, pars triangularis, and pars opercularis, respectively. And for these two areas, the pars triangularis and pars opercularis, it is referred to as the Broca's area. And next, I'm going to be talking about the blue area, which is the temporal lobe. So we can see the superior and inferior temporal sulci. It divides the superior, middle, and inferior temporal gyri. And the area in green, this is called the postcentral gyrus, and it's between the central and postcentral sulcus. And the superior parietal and inferior parietal lobe is separated by this line. It's called the intraparietal sulcus. And we also have this area called the supramarginal gyrus. This is called the angular gyrus. And this area right here is called the arcus parietal occipitalis, and it's referred to as like the boundary between the parietal lobe and occipital lobe. Okay, so next I'm going to be talking about the occipital lobe in yellow. And this line is called the lateral occipital sulcus. It divides the superior and inferior occipital gyri. And this one is called the lunate sulcus, and it's just in front of the occipital pole. And the front of the lunate sulcus is called the gyrus descendens. And also, the arcus parietal occipitalis is included in the occipital lobe, like the important landmark. This is because it is located just like between the parietal and occipital lobe. Okay, so for next, I'm going to be talking about the imaginary lines, but now in the medial aspect of the brain. And we can see this is like comparison of the lateral to the medial. So for the imaginary lines of the medial, it's from the central sulcus, and the other line is from the preoccipital notch. So in this picture, you can see the frontal lobe boundary. In the first picture, the boundary includes the central sulcus in the green line and the cingulate sulcus in blue. And for the next picture, this is the parietal lobe. It's separated by the central sulcus in green, the subparietal sulcus in light blue, and the parietal occipital sulcus in yellow. Okay, so for the next one, temporal lobe is divided by the collateral sulcus and part of the parietal occipitalis, in which is the horizontal red line, but the vertical red line is called the imaginary line and is from the preoccipital notch. And next, the occipital lobe is divided by the parietal occipital sulcus in orange and the imaginary line in red, which is like from the preoccipital notch. Okay, so in this medial view, we could see this part is called the corpus callosum, and it allows communication between the two hemispheres of the brain. And this line, this blue line, is called the sulcus of corpus callosum. And this is the cingulate gyrus, which is it curves full, covering the corpus callosum, and it is one of the components of the limbic system. And this line is the sulcus cinguli. Okay, so this area is called the isthmus of cingulate, and it is referred to as one of the three components of the cingulate gyrus, in which the others also include the anterior cingulate gyrus and the posterior cingulate gyrus. And it's the curving around the splenum of the corpus callosum, and it connects the posterior cingulate gyrus dorsally with the parahippocampal gyrus ventrally. And the parahippocampal gyrus is this area right here. And in some cases, it is also partially separated from the parahippocampal gyrus by the anterior calcarean sulcus. Okay, so for this one, we can see the first line is called the subparietal sulcus. This is called the cingulate sulcus, and it also includes the parts of paracentral sulcus and marginal sulcus. And this is called the anterior paracentral gyrus and posterior paracentral gyrus, which is divided by the central sulcus. Okay, this blue line is called the parietal occipital sulcus. It's divided between the precuneus and cuneus. This is called the calcarean sulcus and lingual gyrus. And this is collateral sulcus. Okay, so I'm sorry, but the calcarean sulcus, this one, it separates the lingual gyrus ventrally from the cuneus and precuneus dorsally. And collateral sulcus refers to a group that separates the lingual gyrus from the fusiform gyrus. And this is uncus and parahippo gyrus. But to see it in easier view, we can see that the uncus is just right above the rhinal sulcus underneath. And the rhinal sulcus separates the parahippocampal gyrus from the fusiform gyrus. And in this picture, you could also see like the medial occipital temporal gyrus, occipital temporal sulcus, And lastly, the lateral occipital temporal gyrus, which is all important. Thank you.